This is the part where I'm having a hard time. I'm having a hard time understanding the level of animosity directed toward Israel right now. Not because I think Israel should be free from criticism, and not because I think the United States has some sort of special obligation to fight Israel's war for them. I don't. I don't think that. But I'm also looking at this going, I don't understand this. I'm watching organizations like Hamas, which are committed to genocide within their own charter, which every chance they get engage in these sorts of activities, which militarize things like schools and mosques and hospitals. And then when counter battery strikes go into it, it's like, I can't believe Israel bombed a hospital. Hamas turned it into a military target.
In the last couple of years of Charlie Kirk's life, he was pretty critical on Israel.
Yeah.
He specifically said that they were going to ethnically cleanse 2.5 million people in Gaza. He also said that he believed that on October 7th, there was a stand down order. He said that he took a helicopter from Jerusalem to Gaza, and it took about 45 minutes, but it took them about 6 to 9 hours to respond. How would you respond to somebody like me that believes in order to be a Christian, you can't be a liberal morally, but also you cannot be pro-life and be pro-Netanyahu, and that we should stop sending endless blank checks to countries overseas?
So when it comes to, so let's put it this way. I've always been generally supportive of Israel's right to exist, right? Well, I'm not generally. I am supportive of Israel's right to exist as a nation state. When it comes to foreign aid, I don't believe the United States government is under any obligation to give another country foreign aid. We do too much of it. Now, that doesn't mean that foreign aid is never acceptable or reasonable or understandable. Sometimes it might make sense. But the problem I see right now is we're looking at a $39 trillion debt. We have a runaway inflationary currency. There's a lot of problems that we have to solve, and I think that we should probably reorient our focus on those. Now, having said that, I disagree with Charlie on some of those other statements. And again, I'm taking you at your word that Charlie said that. I don't think they were trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza. I just don't. And I don't say that because I'm generally supportive of Israel and generally not supportive of Hamas. I can't stand Hamas. But that doesn't mean that the Israeli government always gets it right. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean you have to like Netanyahu. By the same token, I know what military operations in urban terrain look like. One of my biggest frustrations with this whole fight is anybody that wants to be critical of the Israeli government or Israeli combat operations, I'm fine. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about what can be done better. That should always be. That's why we have after-action reviews in the military. But I would beg people to understand something here. Part of the reason why the combat operations in Gaza look the way they do is because Hamas benefits from civilian casualties. Hamas has deliberately made their strategy the maximization of their own casualties in order to play on Western sensibilities. Why? Because they can't beat the IDF in a conventional fight. We talk about like hospitals and mosques and schools and things like that. Do you guys want to know why? When we look at the Geneva Convention or we look at the rules of land warfare, why do we take those things off limits? Why are you not permitted to conduct military operations either in those buildings or to target those buildings for artillery and airstrikes? Because of the propensity of civilian casualties. Right? They're not supposed to be military targets. What happens when your enemy makes it a military target? Am I not allowed to respond now? Wait a second. Am I not allowed to respond now? Am I not allowed to do anything? What happens when I have to conduct urban military operations? And one thing I like to point out is I was a Green Beret, but I wasn't just a Green Beret. I was a Green Beret, went through Sephardic, which is our premier close quarters battle school. I went through SFAUC, which is our Special Forces Operation Urban Combat course. I went through Ranger School, Sniper School, EMT, Airborne, Air Assault, like the list goes on. The United States government spent a whole hell of a lot of money making me a pretty good combat operative. But when you're conducting operations in an urban environment, a 17-year-old that picked up an AK-47 for the first time, spraying it down a hallway kills you. It's a casualty-heavy environment. And the IDF was still going into some of these places announcing that they were coming in to do combat operations. You know they're not required to do that by the rules of land warfare or the Geneva Convention, right? And yet they did it anyways. Why? They wanted to minimize civilian casualties. So why did Hamas insist that they be there? Because they wanted to maximize civilian casualties. Why? Because every time a civilian dies in Gaza, the UN and Doctors Without Borders and CNN and MSNBC and every college campus in America goes, I can't believe what the Jews did to these poor Palestinian civilians. They're creating an impossible thing. We are rewarding Hamas for killing their own people. And Hamas doesn't care. The senior leadership could not care less. They're billionaires. So the thing that I would have said respectfully to Charlie is we can have a conversation all day long on how do we do a better job of minimizing civilian casualties when conducting combat operations. But the moment we start letting Hamas get away with what they were intentionally doing to create additional casualties so that they could beat the IDF the only way they know how, and that's by applying external pressure, then all we do is encourage that sort of behavior, not just from Hamas, but every terrorist organization. And so I think that distinction needs to be made.
Well, wouldn't those same criticisms, go towards Israel bombing churches and schools and things along the lines of and operations that they've done against Hamas and persecuting Christians?
Well, so I have a hard time buying that Israel is actively out there persecuting Christians. I have seen people go on Tucker and other places talk about persecution of Christians in Israel. I can tell you it's never been my experience, nor has it been the experience of any of the other Christians that I've known that have gone to Israel. You know where I have seen a lot of persecution of Christians? Muslim states. And so this is the part where I'm having a hard time. I'm having a hard time understanding the level of animosity directed toward Israel right now. Not because I think Israel should be free from criticism, and not because I think the United States has some sort of special obligation to fight Israel's war for them. I don't think that. But I'm also looking at this going, I don't understand this. I'm watching organizations like Hamas, which are committed to genocide within their own charter, which every chance they get engage in these sorts of activities, which militarize things like schools and mosques and hospitals. And then when counter battery strikes go into it, it's like, I can't believe Israel bombed a hospital. Hamas turned it into a military target. And this is the part where, again, this is why we tell terrorist organizations, you will not be treated like combatants, or you will not be treated like uniformed soldiers if you if you behave in this sort of manner. But what we just told Hamas in this last conflict, especially countries like France, was they can get away with it now. In fact, why wouldn't they do it? What was the consequence for Hamas to doing this? So look, let me say this as profoundly as I can. War just kind of sucks. It's difficult. And I am always open to hear new ways how it can be done, again, more effectively to prevent civilian casualties. But I'm sorry, for me and everything I look at and all of my knowledge on this and all of my experience with this tells me that Hamas is the one that bears the vast majority of the blame on this one. Yeah, I ran the numbers once. If, let's say, Mexico came into Southern California, some would say they already have. Let's say a Mexican organization came into Southern California and we'll adjust for population between Israel and the United States, murdered 40,000 Americans and then kidnapped another 1,200 Americans and took them into captivity in Mexico. What do you think the United States military's response would be to something like that? I know what it was to the Twin Towers because I was a part of the response. And so I just, like on some level, I am struggling with understanding why we don't understand the absolute rage that the Israelis had after October 7th. Now, that doesn't justify engaging in atrocities, and to the extent that atrocities happen, that should be dealt with and prosecuted. I think this is something that requires some perspective. Again, my standard is truth, and I use logic and inductive and deductive reasoning with evidence. I'm sorry, what is your familiarization with combat operations?
I mean, you can refer to that, but at the same time, it took 45 minutes. Okay, the whole country is IDF. So they're all soldiers. Every single person in that country is a soldier, right? They're all soldiers in that country.
And the idea that nobody responded for 45 minutes is inaccurate.
They didn't respond for 6 to 9 hours.
Okay,
every news report out there says
the idea that nobody responded for 6 to 9 hours is not accurate. I don't know where that's being put out.
Well, that's the news. That's their local news. That's news. That's our U.S. news.
So if you
look up the reports, that's what it says. It says it took 6 to 9 hours for them to respond.
Okay, it did not take 6 to 9 hours for them to respond. I don't know what news reports are saying that it took 6 hours for them to respond. It's inaccurate. And again, this is another problem that I tend to have with this. We don't believe the media until we want to.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that,
Well, I can tell you, having been there, having spoken to soldiers that were on the ground, spoken to members of the IDF on the ground, spoken to the guards that were called up. This idea that it took 6 to 9 hours to respond is false, talking to people actually in uniform that were getting shot at and returning fire. Now, was there an intelligence breakdown? Absolutely. Now, was there a stand down order? I can't speak to, I don't know. Okay. I don't think that's likely, but I don't know. But I have a problem with this idea of, well, it should have gone this way, because I've served in a special operations unit. And don't get me wrong, I love perpetuating the myth that special operations, we have a rule. You'll back me up on this, right? There is a rule in special operations communities all over the world, and that is we always perpetuate the myth. And what this means is when your friend is watching John Wick and he looks at you and says, "Can you do that?" You're tip of the iceberg. And then when he walks out of the room, you're like, right? So all I would say is that I am sure there are any number of things that could have been done better on October 7th, but I'm not willing to say that there was a stand down order or it was deliberate. And I know people that responded far quicker than 6 to 9 hours.
Well, thank you for your service and God bless you.
Thank you, sir.